Sounds like that dirty hippie leftist propaganda
Off to a good start.
came from Commieland.
And you didn't have an opinion.
Hello and welcome to the Quackcast. This is Quackcast number 371, I believe. And we're going to talk about political correctness in this Quackcast. So hopefully people will be interested enough to have an opinion.
A respectful opinion.
All sorts of opinions. But before we get into that, I'll introduce everyone like I should. I shouldn't be rude and forget. So I've got Em Claire. Hello.
Hello.
Em Claire, who does Friday's news posts.
Yes.
Which are fantastic. And we have Baines, who's just put his microphone to silence. So
just for a second, so I could cough. Hello.
We have Tansarim.
Hello.
Hello, and Pitt.
No, not partaking in this. Don't introduce me. I'm not here. I don't have an opinion. I don't have opinions.
Your opinions are worthless. All right, so we're going to talk about the PC stuff. But first, I want to mention the featured comic. And the featured comic this week was brought to you by me. And it was the same one that we did the featured music for last week. So it's Empress Mother Earth's Handmaiden. Hello, I'm Ozone Ocean, and this week's feature was Empress Mother Earth's Handmaiden. Ursula Nolan was a thoroughly corrupt businesswoman, a wanton destroyer of the natural world, and an all-round unpleasant human being, driven by childhood tragedy to betray the ideals her parents held dear. She rose to power over their once noted environmentally responsible company and turned it towards far darker ends. Mother Nature had other things in store for her, however. It seems the greatest environmental villain might become the greatest champion. This is a superhero comic. The story is action-adventure. It's an American-style superhero comic, fully digitally coloured. Empress Mother Earth's Handmaiden. The creator goes by the name of NRG Comics. That's NRG. And it sounds like energy. I think that's deliberate. It's rated E for everyone, so, have a look. It's a lot of fun. The colours are really bright and bold. The character design is quite fun. I like some of the characters so far, especially the two brutish baddies at the moment. There's gigantic Amazon ladies who are going to do terrible things to the forest and battle the superhero who has Ursula Nolan, as she has become the Empress. So I hope you enjoy this. It's a good comic, very interesting take on the whole environmental thing. But it's not Captain Planet. This is quite a different work. This is a proper entertaining comic. Anyway, so read Empress Mother Earth Handmaiden by NRG Comics, rated E. And that was the featured comic, Empress Mother Earth's Handmaiden. Okay, so after that, we have the featured music by Gun Wallace. Gun Wallace this week has given us the soundtrack to Wanted Dead or Dead. So there's really not much choice there. So this is obviously a cowboy comic. It's welcome to a much cooler version of the Old West. We open on a widescreen panorama shot of a dry, dusty desert scene and a lone cowboy all in black, kicking his toe in the dirt. This music is as warm as the hot desert breeze. The guitar is as hard as gunmetal. Take it away, Gun Wallace, with Wanted Dead or Dead. that was our featured music. Thank you so much for that, Gulmullers. It was called Wanted Dead or Dead. This is a comic by Mayiv, or is it May 4? I don't know. It's a weird name. And it's rated T. So, yeah, read that. So PC stuff. PC. I got onto this subject because I was watching a video on YouTube about this guy called Metatron. So he's an interesting Italian fellow, and he talks about armor and historical stuff. And he mentioned that he was really surprised at this BBC adaptation of the war on Troy, the whole Iliad sort of thing, war on Troy, whatever that is. I can't really remember the name of the show. Anyway, the actor who's playing Achilles is an English African fellow, and he mentioned that was quite a weird thing because Achilles is a notedly blonde-haired kind of heroic. Well, that not heroic, but of course he's heroic. But he's a kind of blonde-haired kind of character. He's just noted as that, and it's sort of weird for it to be played by a black actor. So he made a point of that, and he was saying, it's this PC going mad kind of stuff, and sort of picking people from certain ethnicities for roles that they wouldn't normally have, just to satisfy some kind of like a quota of political correctness kind of stuff. Anyway, I haven't seen it myself. The only issue I would have is that the fellow is as bald as an orange, and Achilles has to have a full head of flowing blonde hair, or so it doesn't really matter what color the fellow is as long as he's got that hair. Damn it!
The actor also had no feet. Like, how's this going to work?
Exactly.
The whole story.
Yeah, bloody hell. It's ticking all the PC boxes, for God's sake. He's in a wheelchair there being Achilles. Oh, my God.
See what I'm saying?
Jesus, Baines, you're right on the money there.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Personally, and there's the rub, perhaps. As a Greek, I am offended.
Yes, really? Okay.
Yeah.
You are.
Why would I be?
Yes.
Because Achilles, in the Greek culture as I have grown into it, okay, I'm not even going back to ancient Greek culture or whatever, is a very important icon for two reasons. One, he is the embodiment of prowess and pride and everything virtuous. And he's basically like the demigod human version of the sun god. Like, he's sort of a more earthy Apollo. Okay.
Yeah.
He's being used a lot to teach kids a lot of things. And that's the one thing, the one side of his symbolism for us. And the other side is that he has one weakness, and this one weakness that he doesn't take care of, he doesn't actually protect because he is overconfident, perhaps. Okay, that's opens
we get it.
discussion. But that is his downfall.
Painting a target on your forehead and saying, "Shoot me, you bastards! I dare you."
and the thing on this is that he's an icon. He is like a cultural staple that gets to be a very specific way, as was described in the epics. Blonde, white, blue hair, blue eyed, blue-eyed, having a sort of shine and glow to himself of a very specific manner, and so on and so forth. So when you distort this image, you are in effect infringing upon and bending out of shape someone's culture. So you're not actually being politically correct for everyone. You are basically, one could argue that you are taking a dump, and that's how I am saying it, on the culture that you are representing to please other cultures or to please other social groups, not necessarily even those other cultures. So that is not politically correct. That's pandering, in my opinion.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective. Yeah, you're right, because for the British, it's for the BBC. Achilles is just a mythical character, from classical literature. It's not really part of the British culture. But for Greek people, it is a far more central part, and even for Italian people, because they're this Metatron fellow is Italian, and they share that kind of the classical myths and everything like that. But anyway, that's a central part of the culture. So yeah, altering and changing that has far more repercussions and far more effects for you guys than it does for the British people are just treating it like entertainment, much like the Japanese treat Christianity. They do whatever they want to the Christian characters in their TV shows, and it's rather entertaining the way they change them in anime.
There was just a butt in there. Sorry.
Yeah.
There was a recent series on Netflix which I watched. Speaking of essentially a cultural appropriation of Christianity, which I find really interesting, having come from, whilst not necessarily religious myself, but definitely having been in Christian, like the Christian school and whatnot. And it's called Devilman Crybaby. It's very, very different and very interesting, and it's based on a manga which was it kind of introduced the idea of creating a manga, not necessarily for children, but definitely for adults in, I think, around the 1960s and 1970s. Incredibly interesting genesis of a new brand of manga. But that aside, it appropriates Christianity and sets it up. It's sorry, I have to clear my throat. This is I was sitting on that. That was really annoying. So they obviously it's very clear how they feel about Christianity and how they appropriate Christianity and present it less as a dogma and more as more of a collection of myths almost.
Yeah.
And I found watching this series, which kind of dealt with that, it's the idea of this guy taking on a demon, like this high school guy taking on a demon within himself and then becoming like this, they call them devilmen, where it's a combination of a human and a demon. And so it's demon powers with the heart of a human, and then playing on some of the Christian mythos essentially. And having been within the Christian dogma and then having another outside perspective, I found it really interesting coming to the realization of how they use it in their storytelling and deconstruct it in many ways, because they have a very interesting history with Christianity.
Yeah.
And I can see with political correctness, the idea, I feel like the idea of political correctness kind of gets muddied a bit when people start throwing it around without realizing that it is actually quite a neutral term. So political correctness is more about having an awareness of what it is that you're talking about and who you're addressing. And just being very careful about, being empathetic and being understanding towards the cultures that you're talking about, or the groups of people who are marginalized or minorities that you were talking about. And I think that a lot of people use political correctness as a way of saying, oh, you're infringing on my free speech, but it's not really about that. It's just being mindful. It's just being mindful of people's cultures and maybe taking the time to actually learn them and gain different perspectives outside your own.
Exactly. I would...
I'll go on, Tan, sorry.
Totally agree. So I just want to add just a little tack on, if you would like. I think political correctness also involves not being pejorative in the way you talk or refer to other cultures. Like, there is no reason, and actually there is a lot of reason not to put down or undermine any culture, like, and any social group. But that doesn't mean that in order to be politically correct, you should distort objective reality, objective fact, or history, or dress up, quote unquote, events to not be or be in a specific manner. Truth doesn't need dressing up.
But see, I don't feel like that is necessarily political correctness. I feel that that's probably more incorrect cultural appropriation.
Yeah.
Which I feel is in some ways a separate issue to political correctness in many ways.
Yeah, I think that in the name of political correctness, you will find that a lot of that's happening.
Oh, yeah. No, it definitely has a lot of these terms, despite the fact that they are quite neutral, they have a lot of crossover. And like when doing a story, which, trying to think of and incorporate a lot of different looks and styles and stuff like that, in terms of comics as well, like when, say, if you're doing a fantasy comic and you're trying to maybe represent different groups or different races, which can be very touchy, again, and you're trying to be politically correct.
Yeah.
And that is something you've got to be aware of. You have to kind of take the time to learn. And I don't think that, and you're right, like there are established cultures, there are established traditions, and it is important to learn and respect and understand those before appropriating them, I feel. It's literally just about educating yourself in many ways. And if you're looking for a different perspective, go find it. Like, go find its perspective to challenge yourself and learn about that culture. And I think given that this is becoming more and more of a global society, you have really no excuse to not do that. Yeah, I think it's actually, I feel like it's almost your responsibility to learn how to do this now.
Yeah, you should not sort of jump in and use cliches as your guide.
Yeah, the stereotypes aren't necessary. Like, yeah, I think the biggest thing with political correctness is that it, at least within webcomics, is that you do run the risk of potentially running into stereotypes. And I think that's the biggest thing with webcomics, is that you're looking to get a story out really quickly, and you're looking to communicate things really quickly. And you're going to use narrative and visual shorthand, but you could potentially run into the risk of stereotyping. And you've got to be aware that that is something that happens. And, just take the time to actually look at your work critically, like take a step back and look at your work critically and what it is that you're doing, and maybe what values you are putting in your work, because inevitably you are writing from your experience. And you're not always going to know the full depth of the issue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's not just about races or ethnicities. It can be about, just gender issues, all that kind of stuff as well. You can run into issues there. I mean, you can have a gay character being a terrible stereotype, those kind of things. People do that all the time. I think that's probably one of the worst ones that people run into.
I think that in those cases, you create a character, and the only characteristic of that character, his personality, is he's gay, or she is a woman, or she's a strong woman. That's her personality.
She's a strong female character, and that annoys me so much, because there is no such thing as a strong female character. They're just a strong character. Yeah. The gender shouldn't come into it. And one of the things which I don't know if this is, I did have someone, I can't remember where it was, but I did have someone kind of counter me on that. And they did make a good point. I can't remember what it was. They did make a good point at the time. But I was essentially saying that when I go to write characters, I don't necessarily take their gender into account. I write them as they are. They could be a guy or a girl. It wouldn't really matter. The point is that I'm building them as a character, and the gender is kind of secondary to that. It's like, it's just a characteristic that they have. But who they are inside, who they intrinsically are, their core personality traits, it wouldn't matter what gender they are. So, you know, you have some women, like for us, and because both my writing partner and I are, you know, quite, you know, we want to put forward strong characters and strong character development. That is what we worked on the most, is just making sure that it didn't matter if they, like, you could gender flip the entirety of our comics and it wouldn't make a difference. You would still know that that is that character, regardless of gender.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's what a good character should be. They should not be limited by such things. Unless... Oh, no, they shouldn't. Yeah, because, say, if you could have a really girly character who could work just as well as a girly guy. So, yeah, it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I think, like, in terms of gender, that's a little bit, it's probably a little bit easier. Maybe, I don't know. I'll probably get in trouble saying that. But when it comes to culture and traditions and religion, that's when it can get a little bit more tricky. And that's when you need to go and talk to people and do some reading.
Well, exactly. If you have a Muslim character and you want to, you know, go into their family life and all that kind of thing, or their religious rites and all that, then you have to really know what you're talking about. You just can't say, yeah, all Muslims behave like that. That's the way this Muslim character behaves, because, unless you're just doing that character as, you know, just a normal guy doing his stuff, just part of the crew, and you're not really going into aspects of his culture. Maybe you just mention it as a side. Oh yeah, I can't do this on Friday. I've got to go pray, and that's all you're limited to. Then you're never getting too deep into it, and that can work.
Yeah, I still think, like, you'd probably need to do some preliminary work on that. Just to be sure that, like, if that was something that you want to bring, maybe not necessarily focus on it, but that's still part of their core identity as a character.
I think. Oh, sorry. Go on.
I don't know. You could.
No. I was thinking, like, listening to you guys, that all of that definitely not only has merit, everyone has to keep it in mind when creating and designing a story and characters. But on the other hand, I don't think that it is creatively conducive, let's say, to shy away from the stereotype either, because a stereotype is created due to something, not necessarily truth in it, but there is some reason for it existing. So research into that, and if you can use it, do it. And I'm thinking of a specific movie that I am an extreme fan of. It is an Indian production, I think, and film. I think it is in English. I don't remember because I haven't seen it for a while. It is called My Name is Khan, and it is a movie that was snubbed for the Oscars, and it caused a great outrage for that. It was that good. And the idea and the plot behind this is that this Muslim guy is the main character, and he's also a high-functioning person or within the spectrum. He's autistic, but high-functioning. And we watch him as he starts off from India and how his mother made sure that he wouldn't be institutionalized and he would go and be able to have interactions and connections to other people and so on and so forth. It is very, very well done. And then he becomes an immigrant and goes to America, and he finds an Indian woman she's not a Muslim, she's a Hindu. And they fall in love and they marry. Okay. And then 9/11 happens. And everything in their world changes due to the backlash that everyone who was Muslim suffered. And something happened that is very terrible. I will not spoil it. And then this guy goes into this huge odyssey trying to meet the president and tell him that he is not a terrorist because he's a Muslim. All right. And the quote, the biggest quote from the movie is, "Hello, my name is Khan and I am not a terrorist." To the point that now is a small like Easter egg that you find in other Indian movies. What other thing happens though is that he represents the quote unquote normal part of the Muslim society, people that are not murderers, people that live their lives, people that are like everybody else who is or isn't religiously a Muslim. But in the same time, he gets pursued by other Muslims who are terrorists. So you have a whole range. And you also have those people that are in between, those that are emotionally charged and they gravitate towards one or the other pole of contention, let's say. And you see all of them in there. And I think that this is, first of all, very ballsy as a move, showing all kinds, showing how and why they exist and what happened and in what manner this is happening and everything. And also it gives you the chance to evaluate not only the problem, but also remedies for it. If we shy away from the stereotype, just to be politically correct, I think that we are harming pop and international culture as a whole, in a sense. And it doesn't help.
Definitely.
Yeah. That's my thought.
You shouldn't, and I don't even like to say you should and all that kind of shit, but you shouldn't write in order to forward some agenda. I won't even say that because everybody has their own reasons for writing things. You also shouldn't make it such a conscious effort to steer away simply out of fear of stepping on toes, because that creates writing that's insincere and oftentimes very shallow, very lackluster. Sometimes things that are written are offensive. They just might be. I love A Clockwork Orange, and that's a lot of things in that movie will offend you, but it's great. It's written well, and that's not to say that's necessarily like stereotypes, like being offensive and stuff. But it's kind of it's just one of those things where you just have to like Em was saying, like try and be aware as you can of what you're writing, but at the same time, don't be so afraid that you shoot yourself in the foot that you're unable to act.
Yeah. And I think in many ways it also comes down to how you handle yourself as an author and a creator as well. And how you put yourself forward. So one of the things which I actually read recently about A Clockwork Orange was how much that author really hated his work, because apart from the fact that everyone talked it up and he only wrote it in 3 weeks for a quick paycheck, he was like, it's not my best work, guys. I have something better. He also didn't like the effect that it had on the culture. And he came to really resent that. So it's interesting that he wrote something which is quite offensive, and yet the author came to regret the effect that it had on people. So
Anthony Burgess, I think he was.
Anthony Burgess, yeah. So it's interesting, like how a creator who's lauded for this work. He created as like a throwaway. He said, like, I didn't put much thought into it. I just wrote it because I needed a paycheck and rent was due.
Well, the film gave it quite a different effect than the book did, so it's it's a bit.
I think the director and the whole production value is a whole different animal altogether than the book, and that happens with a lot of books.
Stanley Kubrick's vision.
Yeah. It kind of did put a different spin on it. Like, I remember reading I remember seeing A Clockwork Orange and then reading it. And the experiences are quite different. But I couldn't describe as to how they are different. Because, I mean, A Clockwork Orange is just such a weird story.
Yeah. I think that the point in the book was that you grow up, you start out as like a brute, and then you become inculcated into society, and you really, you grow out of that, and you realize that this is actually, it can be a prison, but it's also, freeing. And so I can't remember. Anyway, but the movie was...
He's like, forget it.
The movie took a different take. The movie took... Actually, it's great to be free and it's great to be evil, which is what, the lead character represented.
I'm not sure that's the theme of the movie, though. The character, yeah, maybe, but I don't think that's the theme of the movie.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you what the theme of the movie is. It was just so...
It's a strange bird. It doesn't really bother to really define itself. It kind of...
It does not have a message.
Yeah.
It reads it
almost has these little like pseudo messages that kind of conflict, but like that's only if you like choose to find a message in something. It's
I think weird. To be honest, I mean, I think that it is a study of violence more than anything else, all kinds of violence, and from all the sources it comes, and because everyone is being a perpetrator and a victim in many occasions. So they are both the same, and you are sort of taken by the hand and shown this litany of violent behaviors and violent ranges, let's say. So you take from that what you will.
Yeah. But I almost feel like a lot of people are reading into something that didn't have a lot of authorial intent. They're trying to see things that just aren't there, because he was just like, look, I just need to write something.
Because I mean, even if you take into account what you, if even what you were saying, Tanya, like even if it is a message on violence, which I could totally get behind because violence is through the movie, still even what you were explaining was quite vague. That there's violence in the world. That's a vague message, so it's just like a very strange piece. But anyway, we're probably getting away from maybe the whole PC thing.
Political correctness.
You can make a whole essay on this in another cast, maybe.
Speaking, just going back
violence
to
cast. I'll get
Speaking
into
of
that.
authority intent, that's another thing that also can tie in to PC culture, which is another segue to get us back. But I think if I recall correctly, I read somewhere or I heard that whatever that during the 70s, Lord of the Rings blew up as like the Bible of hippie culture in a sense, and Tolkien hated it because he didn't like hippie culture and didn't write it as a go back to your roots or go back to nature or whatever story. That was never his intent, and he absolutely hated the acclaim and the popularity in that particular social group, let's say, that it had acquired at the time. So from the point that to publish your work, You may have done the best that you could to cater to certain, to protect, to whatever, but the audience will see what they want to see, one way or the other. They will see what they have in their mind, and that is called in psychology projection. They will project whatever it is that is troubling them or is in their mind on the story, one way or the other. Sometimes it will be very obvious what the work is trying to show, and people generally will get it, but other times they may absolutely hinge and hold on to something that is entirely unintentional, or it is not something that the author was going for.
Yeah, well, say in the case of Lord of the Rings, it happened to fit with that culture when, at that time, it happened, themes in it happened to mesh with culture, like Lego. They just fit in and connected. So, yeah, bad luck talking. That's just how it was.
I feel like once you kind of release your work into the world, that's it. It doesn't belong to you anymore. Everyone's just going to have their own opinion. Yeah. It's like, this is part of the, like, you've kind of made your baby and now you got to push it out of the nest. And then after that, it's anyone's guess how that's going to go.
And you hope that it can fly and not just, fall off.
Yeah.
Then
and new parents out there, don't take this literally. That's not...
Yeah. Please don't push babies out of nests.
and preferably don't actually have a nest for your baby. Use a crib.
Well, just going back to the political correctness thing, we made a point about, what was it? Something about the portrayal of characters in books and things like that of different ethnicities. And, damn it, I can't remember. Anyway, I was thinking about the famous book, what was it? Huckleberry Finn. Sam Clemens, Mark Twain. Yeah, that's who he's called. So that's a famous book. So you've got the whole, it tackled a lot of different things like racism and, the position of black people in America of that time or just a few years before he wrote it. And it's a very, very important work because of that. But it's actually been banned in a lot of schools because it's not politically correct. It's not seen as being politically correct, It mentions the N-word and things like that.
I think also that happened to Kill a Mockingbird. Same thing. For this.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I read that one in high school.
Yeah, but now it's
American
people are offended now. So the thing is, and that is another issue that I take big issue with, like big issue with, is history says and reports certain things that were happening. We cannot deny that there was racism in the past. We cannot deny that people would, in specific time periods, call and shun other social groups in certain manners. So when you are representing and you want to present a historically correct film or movie or webcomic or whatever, you cannot avoid everything there. You cannot twist it to be something else. You will not have people celebrating women's emancipation in 1910.
Yeah,
that wasn't the thing. You will not have women, all of women at least, celebrating women's or wanting women's emancipation in 1910, because they were divided on that issue at the time. So and so on and so forth, and that goes for, like, you will have black slaves during the era of black slavery. It's only historically correct. It doesn't mean that you want to propagate this, quote. I don't even know if this turn of phrase is racist. I'm going to say it anyway so that I can learn. But you will not get You don't have to present it in an Aunt Jemima way. Okay, that, oh my God, they were very happy in that particular position.
Yeah, that would be wrong. Like, because that is so incorrect.
Exactly. But
yeah,
you can't put, for example, white people in the position of the slave as a rule. Maybe as an exception. Maybe there was also Irish slavery. Yeah. But like you will not. You should not, I think, and that I think should be said as a should. You should not twist history, because history brought us to where we are now. If that hadn't happened before, we wouldn't have had all the activism, all the revolutions, all the movements that brought about the change that we celebrate today. It didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It is a yield. It is a result of struggles of people that you are also nixing from history. Mm-hmm. If that didn't happen, because let's take Martin Luther King. If there was no problem with the blacks before, then there was no reason for Martin Luther King to be who he was and do what he did. And you are doing a disservice to that man.
Yeah.
And you are being, I think, disrespectful. I think that is wrong to do. Just represent it as it was.
And that just comes down to educating yourself. Like, mm-hmm. It's just, and I think like it's almost a given that historical fiction requires a lot of research. Like if you're going if you're going to do anything historical fiction, you have got to have your library full of books. Like there is no way around that. But then like you get into the murky territory of like revisionist history, which is what I mean. Look at Inglourious Bastards. That was revisionist history.
Yeah, but it was acknowledged, so that's fine. Yeah. Like we know that he's in an alternate historical.
Yeah.
Thing.
That was kind of fun. Like that is one of my like all-time favorites. In terms of like the story and
it's
the
a fantasy, really. It's an acknowledged
fantasy. Yes. Just like for example 300. Nobody was offended with that because that's not. It was never intended as an accurate. Okay, accurate. I can say an accurate representation of the Spartans. Yeah. Like we all know that the Spartans didn't go around in go boy spandex and like they didn't break formation and blah blah. But it doesn't matter, and that's why everyone over here enjoyed the hell out of that film.
Yeah,
as opposed to others, like going back to the Black Achilles, that is presented in a straight up serious, historically correct manner, and everybody here hates that thing. It's like seeing red when you see it. For that reason. That's the only reason, because it twists the reality. It's not just what if Achilles was black, let's explore it. That would be completely different. It would have a different reception here in Greece.
Yeah.
See what I mean? It's the twisting of reality that gets to people.
Have you guys ever included any characters to increase diversity in your comics? Have you sort of looked at your comics and thought, oh my God, they're all white or something like that? And they're like, no.
You know what? In Putrid Meat, I did something like that once, and I ended up accidentally making this analogy that I didn't mean to. And I look back at it now and I'm like, oh shit, but I'm not going to correct it because I still think it's kind of funny. Because it's not like, it's not an analogy that could really hurt anybody, I don't think. But the part where Bones and the others are going through the desert and they've escaped from the facility, and they happen across this settlement, and it's got all of the so in Putrid Meat, we don't have countries like we have them now. It's just like, it's like Mad Max world, basically.
Yeah.
And And so they happen across this settlement, and the people I have there, they're all right. So they're not like any certain type of Middle Eastern people. They're not people that you could recognize as being, Iraqi or anything like that. But like compared to the rest of the cast of Putrid Meat, they look pretty Middle Eastern, and they live out in the desert, and stuff. And so they come to these guys, and I'm going to preface this by saying that at the time, Tanya and I were writing this villain named Isis. It was the goddess Isis. It was the old goddess Isis from Egypt.
Ahead of your time.
And Isis was in the comic, and she had this settlement under her control, and they couldn't shake her off. And so basically, Bones and the guys who are basically Americans come in, and they have them try and go and get rid of ISIS. And in the meantime, they end up inadvertently introducing ISIS to their technology, which is this great big fucking tank that they have. And so now she wants that. And she sends these things after Bones to try and get it. And I did not do any of that on purpose.
Oh my God, you have summed up like that entire thing.
I was like, oh my God, dude. So, and you know what? I'm sure that like there are probably ways that, Putrid Meat itself is and if you want to mark like an offensive comic, it doesn't go out of its way to be offensive, but it's not a nice comic. And so like considering how I've treated other people in that comic, not out of race or anything like that, but like just in general, like I'm glad that I didn't do worse on accident.
You didn't like prophesize any further global conflicts?
I'll let you know. Stay tuned. I don't know. Take a look.
No more comics. They come through. You are banned from doing any more webcomics.
Cut off my hands.
You hold too much power.
I just remembered you guys do have a more diverse character, so to speak. That's a PC term, isn't it? You have a diverse character in your Brave Resistance because your lead character is
Native American.
Indigenous American. Yes, Native American. So yeah, that's
indeed.
a different thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
He also has like his background and the fact that he is who he is will drive the story forth after this first arc where he gets established in the Greek resistance. But after that, it's going to be his background and things that have happened before he arrived and crash landed.
You're not going to show his past and have him growing up like with feathers in his hair and riding horses.
No. I don't know.
No.
That would be very bad.
That would not be PC.
No.
Chasing cowboys.
I'm thinking, like I have been thinking, all of my cast is white in Without Moonlight. And
what can you do? It's during the Second World War in Greece. There wasn't much diversity.
Yeah.
So, like I was thinking, I haven't actually been called out on that. Hopefully, because everybody understands that this.
Yeah, the Nazis weren't known for including, like Africans and Arabs and all that kind of stuff within their ranks, or Indians. And
not at that particular time, around like 1945, late 1944, they did include among their ranks a lot of diverse, multicultural people because they were running out of cannon fodder. But
well, it's mainly from Eastern Europe.
Not yet.
But,
not yet.
In Greece, and if you had anybody who is different ethnically, they would have been sort of singled out by the Nazis. So,
yes, very much so.
Yeah.
But the other thing also is that Greece has been
the ultimate anti-PC people. Ethnically
and racially, absolutely not diverse, the opposite. The word doesn't go.
Homogeneous?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Has been homogeneous until as recently as late 1980s to mid 1990s.
Yeah.
And this is now a little story that I'm going to share to show how the whole racist thing also depends on context and the cultural background of people. Like, for example, when I was at school, elementary school, which was during the 80s, we had for one season, basically only, a black kid in the class. And that was a fluke. It never happened, had never happened before, never happened after, because his dad was like some sort of diplomat or whatever, and he wanted, for some weird reason, to enroll his kid in public school instead of a private one. And I was in public school at the time. So he was the only black kid in the class. And everyone was fascinated with him. It was, wow, this exotic being that has arrived, that is completely, not completely, but is different to us. It was like a curiosity to get to know more about this person and to ask questions like, how do I say it? Racist questions that would be considered racist right now, like why are you black? Because we were 9 years old, all of us at the time. So why are you black? Is there a reason you are black? Can I be black? Because it was,
as a child, what other questions are you going to ask?
Children do not have filters.
After the first, phase of getting to know and getting accustomed to the idea that this just is the color of his skin. Okay. We would call this guy very, like, in banter, and actually as a compliment for kids, I don't know, milk chocolate. We would call him that.
Oh my God,
yeah.
Really?
Little milk chocolate, as a matter of fact, chocolataki, which was actually a pet name, like a very positive thing.
That's not making it better.
Because he was sweet. He was sweet. It was sweet. It was something that everybody wanted to have. Okay.
Yeah. Oh my God, this makes it worse.
It's good to bring this up though, because this is where, it's a difference of context. Things are going to be. If you did that in the States, where have people not only regularly, but there's a history of having Black people and of mistreating them. And if somebody were to ask that question back home, it would be, that person would be, groomed to the response that after that question will come, they'll be treated differently.
Yeah, it's a
in one way or another. And
cultural history is different.
Context matters. Context. Oh, that's the first thing we learned in archaeology, is that context always matters.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So this black child is the son of a diplomat. So he's from Africa. He has no connection to the same kind of situation that would happen in America.
Yeah, I think he was from Africa somewhere. I don't actually remember, because nobody cared. It didn't matter to the kids, because whatever country he told us, we didn't even know it existed. Nobody did geography at the time. We were too young for it, apparently. Geography started two classes later.
Yeah.
So we didn't know. But the thing is, the context of the thing is, and then I will tell you how, because that's the good part of the story. And I will also tell you the bad part of the story. After that, it was fine. Like, everybody had asked their questions, they got their answers. He had the cool chocolate skin that, he was constantly a chocolate for us, like sweet and everything. Like, because kids imagined that if he had that color, he would also taste like that.
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
we get it. We get it.
So anyway, however, the teacher was a bitch, and she was extremely racist.
Oh. Okay.
She was one of those terrible non-style teachers that even I remember fearing her until well into my teenage years. That's how terrible she was. And she also would use violence in the classroom, and she would definitely enjoy segregating kids, even without the black kid in the class. So
Wow.
she hated the guts of that kid. She made his life a living hell. So she would also recruit her pet students to do the same. So in the end, you ended up having in recess two factions of kids: the kids that would defend this guy, and the other kids that would not defend this guy, and they would try to attack him. And we had this terrible polemic until the guy had to go because his father also left. So that was terrible. And I remember that's when I learned how to fight in the schoolyard. That was the first punches I ever threw in defense of the guy and everything. So, but the point that I want to make is that culturally there was no reason, and that we had no way of being racist to the kid. We were just curious as kids. The particular teacher was racist, but she was also racist to the kids without the black person. So the racism was inherent in her, or the segregating culture, in a sense, was inherent in her. And she just found a far easier scapegoat for that particular semester.
Right.
So
it's an interesting point.
It's not the questions, and it's not the interaction per se. It's the context, first of all. It is the cultural history, second, and of course, whether you have this bad apple that is going to introduce people into the concept of segregating each other based on whatever, be it skin, be it
religion,
height,
yeah,
yes, academic performance, that was always a favorite, and all sorts of other things like that. Yeah. So there's that.
And like, speaking of that, like, it's very interesting that you bring up that point, that it's, you know, right in the formative years, between like 5 and 10, where you're beginning to absorb adult values. It's really important that as an adult you show kids the right values, because that's exactly that's the inner voice then in their head that they take on to later in life. And like, I know, having taught, like, so I went to the same primary school as a lot of my housemates. So the housemates I live with now went to the same primary school, and also my partner went to the same primary school. And I didn't have this experience, thank goodness, but because I wasn't there at the time, I didn't come until year 3. But before that, they had this absolute bitch of a teacher who hated guys, like hated boys, little boys. And that really affected them, because she would belittle them. She would make them feel really awful just for being boys, you know, like cute little boys. And she used to be really sweet to the girls and then really awful to the boys. Now, what does that say to kids when they're that young about gender and equality? And they took that. They absorbed those lessons, and they became like very socially anxious for a number of years. Like, it took some of them quite a lot of time to work past that and to kind of reconcile that she was just a cow. She was a bitch and did not deserve to be treated like that. And what adults don't realize is that kids, I mean, from 0 to 5 and then 5 to 10, they're two different types of formative years. And this is where they are absorbing all the values of that culture and of their parents. And whatever their parents say, those kids are going to repeat later on in life. That's the inner voice in their head. So if you're instilling the wrong values, whether that be for their self-esteem, their mental stability, their emotional stability, or their cultural stability and acceptance, that is what they're going to take with them later in life. And it is so hard to deprogram that later on.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Totally.
And you've just, like, you have got to take the time to be, I mean, not just be aware of what you say to kids, but also how you treat them, because this is the future. And what you say now is what they take into the future and the values that they then go on to instill.
Exactly.
And
absolutely.
Yeah, and even as authors, that's something that we have to be aware of, that the people that read it, they're they're going to take stuff away from our story. And you've got to be aware that they're going to take what they want from it, but you've kind of got to set up the values there as well, because you don't know who's reading it.
Yeah.
So, that's where being aware of what you write and what you mean to say is really important.
Very much so. Yeah, I tried to have a more diverse cast in. It's hard to pinky tier because it's sort of set in like this alternate Earth. I don't know, sort of Russian kind of people. So it's not really logical for it to have too much of a diverse cast, but I still do. We go across in different countries, and on one panel or a couple of pages, I've got a meeting happening on a battleship, and have darker skinned people and all sorts of different things in that scene, even though it doesn't make sense, because I just, at that stage, I thought, yeah, we're looking a bit same here, so I'll include some more people. And later on I had, I've got action in the Middle East, so I have to have various Middle Eastern people in my comic. And yeah, I've just portrayed them as people, I haven't sort of portrayed them as good or bad. They're bad or good depending on their role in the story. So like, if someone's a prison guard or something like that, they're not good.
Well, they're not good in that context.
Yeah.
They might be good in their families or something.
Exactly. Good otherwise.
And you want to look out for tokenism too, which I don't think that you do tokenism either. I don't feel like your characters are ever tokens, like, and they're like I need like a black guy here, or I need like a Spanish guy or something, so I need to check off this box, I do
in
actually
many ways
remember.
That's worse.
What's that?
So in many ways tokenism is worse too.
Tokenism gives them completely the wrong impression, because it means that is totally devaluing that person. They're only there for their culture. Well, they're only there for their ethnicity and nothing else, and that is their character. And they don't add anything else to the cast except that. Yeah. I think initially, though, that can be very important to the ethnic groups they represent, because say back in the old days, there was no black people on TV until you get this one token black character, and that was someone for all the black people to identify with, even though it was just a token. So in those kind of instances, these days it is a totally negative thing, but back then people needed that one character. So when you have ethnicities or groups that aren't represented, then token characters have slightly different meaning. They are important. It's just that when, say, we do have whole casts of shows now that are black or Mexican or whatever, and having a token cast member, say in Seinfeld, like, it's a really old reference, but say, I don't know what's recent now. I don't watch TV. Stranger Things. That's something new. If you had a token character in that's way more offensive, isn't it?
Because we like to think that we've gone past that point. It's patronizing is what it is. Yeah. I mean, I say that as a white person, I have plenty of representation, but I imagine that it's pretty patronizing. A little bit of a throwback to what we were talking about before, but I did just remember that I do have a pretty blatant stereotype in Putrid Meat, and I did make him that way. He hasn't been in the comic for a long time, but Johnny Z, the pizza guy, who
I was thinking of
yeah, I forgot about him. It's been a long time, and and granted, still, he's not supposed to be representative of all Italians, but he's got that very cartoonish, like everything's like, oh, it's a me, Mario kind of voice going on, and I had a lot of fun with that. I don't regret it at all. Even if people call me out on it, which I don't imagine people will call me out. And see, that's one thing, is I think that there's kind of this straw man of social justice warrior that people imagine. And granted, they do exist on the internet, people that are maybe a little too sensitive to things, or just don't explain themselves correctly, in a way that you can really relate to why they feel like how they feel, how they're reacting. But I think, but you're going to get all kinds of people on the internet. I mean, it's the internet. It's all over the world. It's international. You're going to get all sorts of people. But I think on a daily basis, I think the people that we've created to be like these, super social justice, warriors that people imagine. I don't think they're commonplace, or else our comics would just be torn apart. And I'm not saying that our comics are offensive, they're not, but I'm saying that if people regularly were the way that social justice warriors are portrayed, this straw man idea, then things would definitely be a lot more mouthy, and they're not.
Yeah.
So
yeah, they're a lot more rare than some people say they are.
I think I wanted to add something, and I will probably forget it, so I will say it now. I did say about being true to history and not shying away from representing how things were at the time. On the other hand, there are some things that you should take into consideration so as not to create a stereotype yourself with your work that isn't relevant, or you wouldn't like it to be relevant anymore. And what I mean by that is, when I started writing and creating Without Moonlight, of course it is World War II, it is X and Y and Z of the Allies or the Greeks or whatever against the Axis powers, and depending on where you were on the globe, you had specific opponents. You had the Japanese, or you had the Italians, or you had the Bulgarian people, or you had the Germans. And nobody was calling them at the time Nazis. They were the Germans.
Yeah, they were the Jerrys.
And for a very long time in Greece, German was a source of fear. Like, the Germans are coming is a turn of phrase. It's like a little turn of phrase, meaning that someone is attacking us. Okay. It still exists today. So nobody was calling them Nazis. However, if I went, and that would be the historical accurate way, to go and have every character refer to the Nazis as Germans rather than Nazis. But that would be unfair and wrong, in my opinion, for an audience today, because the vast majority of German people, and I'm choosing my words very specifically, have denounced and fought against Nazism, especially the latest generations and everything. They do not deserve to be associated with that particular category. So I don't have actually people like Greeks in my comic call the Nazis Germans. They call the Nazis Nazis, which is not historically accurate.
because you're not necessarily going for historical accuracy so much as avoiding generalizations that perpetuate a stereotype.
I don't want the association. I don't want the association to be made that all Germans are Nazis, because that is not the point of the story, and I don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
So the only person that is being called a German in the story so far is Arthur, and there's a reason for that, clearly. Everybody else is just a Nazi.
Yeah.
So,
but I mean, wrapped up in that as well is it's not just about the fact that you're calling them a Nazi to avoid calling everyone in Germany a Nazi. It's also wrapping up, like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it's also a bit of a narrative shorthand, because you're wrapping up an entire ideology by calling them Nazis rather than Germans.
Yes, of course.
So, yeah. So it makes more sense to call them Nazis, because it's not just a matter of like, oh, it's not because everyone in Germany is like that, but it's also because it's just a shorthand to say, well, everyone is very familiar, or a lot of people are very familiar with the ideologies and practices and the history surrounding that party.
Yes,
so
yes.
It's a lot easier to do it that way.
Also, culture is she just really acknowledging that culture changes and the world changes, and terms mean different things to different generations. So now when we say Nazi, we mean the bad guys. But back then, Germans was the bad guys. Nowadays, German means just a people of a particular country. It doesn't mean what it meant then.
Exactly. Because back then, Nazism and the Nazi Party was just another political party.
Yeah.
That's
so
all.
now it's actually like a sign of an ideology. It's not necessarily associated with a country. It's associated with a series of ideas and theology, essentially.
Yeah.
There was slang that you could use if you wanted to meet some middle ground and say, these are our enemies and we have a name for them. And that's kraut, at least over here, people used kraut a lot of the time. It was even papers and stuff, kraut, and unfortunately Jap and stuff like that. You wouldn't dare say that shit today, but it was pretty common language back then. And I think if you were to write something wartime like that took place, at least in the States, then you would almost have a responsibility to use some of those words and some of those phrases.
It's also because it sets the time period as well, because that was the language that they used.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But you have to change it in certain ways for modern audiences so they can identify with it and understand it.
I think also there's a degree, like definitely, I have used kraut as a term that's being flung around. But I think you also need to first acclimate the audience and then, introduce them to another level and another level and another level of the historicity of time. So when it began, I strongly felt I couldn't afford to do that. I would probably lose the audience before I could.
You'd come off as abrasive. Your story would come off as
exactly.
Yeah,
so
it depends on who you have saying it and in what situations and all that kind of thing.
Exactly, and yes.
I was just going to say
there's also the other thing. There are some things that happened historically that aren't very widely known, or they haven't been accounted enough times. And they did happen, and they were specific social groups or ethnic groups like ours know about very, very well. But if you were to just throw that at the audience, at an international audience, they would not be able to accept that as true. They would attribute it to creative exaggeration, or a secret agenda, or sorts of things like that.
Ice cream.
Ice cream.
Well, I was just going to say on the topic of things that modern audiences don't understand. maybe say you're an author and you're being far too politically correct. You're trying far too hard. So you're not going to have your characters saying, you have a story set in the 1920s. You're not going to have any of your characters saying the N word to characters. Say this is a story set in Chicago, 1920s. You're not going to have any of your characters saying the N word. You're not going to have segregated places of business or anything like that. And you're being really, really careful for those kind of aspects. What you can do is you can end up making your work kick the audience out of a suspension of disbelief and make your work totally unbelievable and stupid because they look at that and they think, that's not the 1920s. That's not how people behave.
You're treating your audience like an idiot.
Yeah.
You're not respecting their intelligence.
You also run the risk of teaching to an audience that isn't historically informed that's how it was back then, and it's not. And you create this completely different idea of how the cosmos and how the world worked just a few decades ago.
And a fantasy version, like people do of World War II often.
A rose-tinted version, basically. I think that there is the right, like the golden ratio. Like I have said that a lot, or Without Moonlight. Like if I actually was completely historically accurate about the policies of suppression and control that the Nazis did use in Athens, for example, I wouldn't be believed.
Yeah,
it's too grotesque. It's too extreme. If there weren't photographs, but even I wouldn't believe it because it's so much. I have opted not to use it, not only because it would be for me very hard to draw, but also because I don't think it's necessary. You can't get the idea of what happened, and you can get the scope and the impact without showing that to an audience that is more or less virgin to what happened. You don't want to rate them from the get-go, at least. You want to implement the concept without shutting them down because it's too hard. Too hard. And whoever is interested can then research and find the rest of the truth and see how far the rabbit hole goes if they're there.
And that's an interesting point that you bring up there, because that is what's called tangential learning. So it's being exposed to a subject and being so interested that you want to continue learning more about it. And that's something that's really interesting in historical, that's why I think historical fiction is incredibly important, because it does inspire people to learn more about something. And if you can inspire people to learn more about something, then that's an awesome thing as a creator.
Yeah, very much so. Well, I hope we inspire people to learn about political correctness and what it actually is. I think we should...
Or if you're going to go the other way and decide not to be politically correct, I think you should go all the way and offend everything and everybody at the same time and make it I want to see the biggest clusterfuck. I want to see you take the knowledge that we have given you today and use it for evil. Absolutely evil.
Go back in
see the
time
monster you can create
and produce South Park. And...
Create the perfect storm.
Yes.
Of political incorrectness.
There we are. On that bombshell, we created South Park. It was us. Yeah. It was us all along.
Yeah, guess where Trey Parker and Matt Stone got their ideas.
Exactly. Plagiarists. They'll never get their masters.
Yeah, they copied our notes.
All right. Thank you guys for being part of the Quackcast.
Well, thank
this
you.
This has been Quackcast number 371. Woo!
Racking up those numbers.
We are. Getting bigger and better. All right. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.